Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. Marriage. Although marriage isn't the main theme of Agnes Grey, it is certainly a major minor theme within the novel. We are, as readers, quite aware of the marriages of the two couples that Agnes goes to work with. The marriage between the Bloomfields is quite clearly an arranged marriage. Their relationship is very cold on both sides. Mr. Bloomfield is sneering towards his wife, belittling towards his wife, and clearly there is no affection there. As he is uncivil to Agnes, so he verges on a similar incivility towards his wife, although it's generally couched in a somewhat more restrained style. The Murray's marriage would appear also to be an arranged marriage, although one in which the two partners are perhaps more at ease with one another, perhaps more prepared to accept their different roles and to simply allow the other partner to get on with their role within the marriage. The husband spends most of his time in his own study, his own office, from which he runs his estate, manages his stables. He clearly has the hunting, shooting, fishing interests, typical of a landed squire of the period. Mrs. Murray is very much a social hostess, interested in the fashionability and the social standing of her home and her family within the local gentry group. They simply let one another get on with their roles. So there are two examples of arranged marriages very prominent within the novel and seen throughout the course of the novel. What do we mean by an arranged marriage exactly? It's not that the marriages, the matches will have been determined by the bride and the groom when they were still children by their respective families. But by this stage in history, what we mean is that the marriage is undertaken for reasons of status. And the reasons of status may be present on either or both sides. One party or the other may be choosing to marry in order to acquire greater wealth, in order to acquire greater social standing, in order to live in a grand country house, this will be a reason for the woman to marry, to be the mistress of a country home. It was also the case at this period that women, broadly speaking, needed to marry. Within this set of videos on Agnes Grey, it's already been discussed the very limited career opportunities that women had. And there was a stigma to being a single and unmarried woman at this period. So the ideal situation really was for a woman to marry if she could. There is another, there are two other actually arranged marriages, as I'm terming them. One is Mr. Hatfield's decision to get married. He had previously been setting his cap at the rather wealthy Rosalie Murray in the hope of, in fact, improving his social status through his marriage and his financial status through his marriage. He was unsuccessful in that. Rosalie had ambitions of her own, which took her in a different direction, and we'll discuss those in a moment. Mr. Hatfield Rosalie says of him in speaking to Agnes towards the close of the novel, "Oh, he made up to an elderly spinster and married her not long since, weighing her purse against her faded charms and expecting to find that solace in gold which was denied him in love. Ha ha." Of course, the love that was denied him was hers, in her opinion. Rosalie herself, from the outset of her career as an adult woman, is set upon marrying to advantage. She has her coming out ball, and already on this day she sets up a target range of men from whom she might potentially choose. The most favoured of these potential suitors is Sir Thomas Ashby of Ashby Park, and the reasons why he is so favoured are already there in that description. He is a titled man, he is a baronet, and he has a country estate and a country park. A very nice match in social terms, financial terms, and also in material terms, landowning terms. Rosalie's mother is complicit in pressing for this match. She at no point advises Rosalie against marrying a man whom she may not like, let alone love. A man who is perhaps not particularly pleasant. The important thing is that her daughter makes the social match of the season, really. Rosalie's aim is, with regard to Sir Thomas Ashby and perhaps more particularly Ashby Park, is to have a share of it on whatever terms it might be offered. This is what she says in chapter 22. Very quickly after the marriage, all semblance of affection between the two partners falls away. By chapter 23, Rosalie is saying, "I detest that man," referring to her husband. It's difficult to know whether or not Sir Thomas Ashby was in love with Rosalie. She may have had considerable dowry. Her parents are clearly very wealthy. It may have been that he was really attracted to her as she was a very beautiful girl. She's described as being a very beautiful girl in the novel, with good taste and accomplishments and capacity for playing music, which if you're living in the countryside, or if you were living in the countryside in the 19th century with no radio, no television, would have been a very attractive quality, I think, in a wife, potentially. Now, whether Sir Thomas never had any affection for Rosalie, or whether she's caused him to lose affection for her by her superficial nature, which he may have discovered following the marriage, or because she has continued a flirtation with one of her former suitors in London, this has angered him greatly, and he has now removed her from London and effectively sequestered her to Ashby Park, which, now that she's forced to stay there, she doesn't appreciate in the same way as she previously thought she would. At all events, the marriage has fallen apart completely. The problem with such a complete failure of a marriage is, at this period especially, the power that the husband held within the marriage. And I think that this has been totally underestimated by Rosalie and her mother prior to the marriage. If marriage to a not very pleasant man fails, and his affection is withdrawn, the wife may very well find herself in a thoroughly miserable position. And this is Rosalie's situation. It's exactly the circumstances she finds herself in. Agnes goes to visit Rosalie at her new home sometime after she's married, and the two young women are strolling through the park there in the morning. As we were strolling in the park, talking of what my companion had seen and heard during her travelling experience, a gentleman on horseback rode up and passed us. As he turned in passing and stared me full in the face, I had a good opportunity of seeing what he was like. He was tall, thin and wasted, with a slight stoop in the shoulders, a pale face, but somewhat blotchy and disagreeably red about the eyes, plain features and a general appearance of languor and flatness, relieved by a sinister expression in the mouth and the dull, soulless eyes. "I detest that man," whispered Lady Ashby with bitter emphasis as he slowly trotted by. "Who is it?" I asked, unwilling to suppose that she should so speak of her husband. "Sir Thomas Ashby," she replied with dreary composure. "And do you detest him, Miss Murray?" said I, for I was too much shocked to remember her name at that moment. "Yes, I do, Miss Grey, and despise him too, and if you knew him, you would not blame me." "But you knew what he was before you married him." "No, I only thought so. I did not half know him really." I know you warned me against it, and I wish I had listened to you, but it's too late to regret that now. And besides, Mamma ought to have known better than either of us, and she never said anything against it, quite the contrary. And then I thought he adored me and would let me have my own way. He did pretend to do so at first, but now he does not care a bit about me. But I should not care for that. He might do as he pleased, if I might only be free to amuse myself and to stay in London and to have a few friends down there. But he will do as he pleases, and I must be a prisoner and a slave. The moment he saw I could enjoy myself without him, and that others knew my value better than himself, the selfish wretch began to accuse me of coquetry and extravagance. And so it goes on. So Rosalie finds herself trapped in this marriage, and especially Rosalie's marriage and her situation is the way in which Anne Brontë discusses in this novel her opinions about arranged marriages, her opinion about marriage where marriage is undertaken for reasons of status and advantage. Where Anne Brontë was so extremely religious, and where at this time marriage in Great Britain was a religious sacrament exclusively, this is an important point that she's making, something which is dear to her heart and close to her. It's believed that Anne Brontë had on one occasion been very much in love, and she may still at this time have been harbouring hopes of getting married one day. But she has clearly very distinct views about the sanctity of marriage. We see two examples of love match marriages in the novel. One is between Agnes's own parents. Her mother defied her family in marrying Richard Grey, and was disowned by her family, who regarded it as too lowly a match for her. Her chosen husband didn't have enough wealth to be pleasing to her family, and she was disowned as a result. So she came to Richard Grey without a dowry of any kind, which at this period implied that a woman was coming to her husband as a bit of a burden. However, the love was so strong between this couple that Richard Richard Grey's position was that if she would but consent to embellish his humble hearth, he should be happy to take her on any terms, while she, on her part, would rather labour with her own hands than be divided from the man she loves, whose happiness it would be her joy to make, and who was already one with her in heart and soul. So on both sides, the couple are prepared to give up worldly wealth, worldly possessions, status and a life of ease in order to be with one another. Less sacrifice is called for at the time that Agnes and Mr. Weston get married. However, neither of them have come from particularly wealthy background, although both of them, of course, are educated people. Agnes, in the epilogue of the novel, looking back on the years that she spent with Mr. Weston, says, "We have had trials, and we know that we must have them again, but we bear them well together and against the final separation, that greatest of all afflictions to the survivor. But if we keep in mind the glorious heaven beyond, where both may meet again, and sin and sorrow are unknown." And so it goes on. So, by contrast to Agnes's self-searching that she went through as her feelings of love for Weston first emerged, and she worried about them displacing her love of God. Here at the end of the novel we see that marital love and the devotion of religious love are intertwined, and that eventually the marital love will revert to the devotional love and to devotional faith in the mind of the character Agnes. But no doubt I think in the mind of the author as well. And again, this is one of the points in the novel where I think we see that the voice of the narrator and the voice of the author really are one and the same voice.